broadcasting now. Good day, good day, good day. I hope you are all well, adequately fed and watered and sheltered. We will, as usual, start the formal chit-chattery after a couple of minutes so that we can let everyone in. Apologies for the terrifying stretched image below. I'm going to do my CSU IT Master sort of sales spiel that is associated with these short courses. It's a butchered version of a long form advertisement for study generally. And there's another photo in there most of the time. And I just don't like the dead space. So please accept this almost life-size image. Now, to save time, I'll probably get started as we go and just put it all into one big recording. But I'm going to start a poll, just like I've got heaps of content in this little prezzo before we get to Matt and talking about actual things like data acquisition. But I'll launch this poll just so that you can tell me what you're most keen on hearing me rubbish on about. Here's a loose agenda. I'm really interested in whether you want to know, why to study a master's, why you should, if you're keen on studying, study with us, how it works. Really interesting. It's sort of the details, which is really interesting because I sort of tend to think that the detail is actually the least important part. The hard bit is convincing yourself or being convinced that studies are worthwhile practice, because you've all known that studies are available, I assume, for a fair while. It's just you're probably not doing it, and the question is why. But given the results are skewed fairly strongly towards the details, I'll just whip over my foolproof argument, bulletproof, I would say, for why people should study masters generally, and then why to study at CSU and IT Masters answers itself. Anyway, I'll end the polling and share the results, and you can all have a quick look at them. There we go, and I'll be as quick as I can, really. Alrighty, so I think it's important to make clear why I think postgrad IT study is a viable option. So I'll very briefly go through my argument for that. And if that argument holds, then go through why CSU and IT Masters are good for it, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. Okay, just a general theme. IT is a very broad field, and it's getting broader. So I think your existing strengths are far more important than what you think you lack. Often, people are waiting to just perfect themselves before jumping in. I think just jumping in and padding it out as you go is the best way to do that. There's no one way to start. There's all sorts of ways to get in, and I think we can help you in that regard, sort of decide which way to go. So why study a master's? The argument is sort of in 3 dot points. It's a worthwhile pursuit. You're already here. Seems like you might be interested, and the entry requirements are less onerous than you might think. But of course, me being me, I want education, or any education that IT Masters provides, to be its own reward, just like these short courses. Postgrad study absolutely fits that criteria if that's what you're after. I just think it's interesting from any perspective, and hopefully Matt will convince you of that too. Whether it's looking at possible technological solutions, wondering about the way IT influences business or political decision making, given that's been in the news recently, or just seeing what you can learn and do for yourself. I hope you can see the intangible benefits of engaging with IT through postgraduate study or any study are really quite clear. But we all need to eat. So it's a good tool. The reality is you need to get to the interview, you need to get the job. And there's so many different institutions and certifiers and industry niches that, and people wanting jobs at the moment, that you sort of need to, be in a position to sort of separate yourself from the pack. So realistically, most of the jobs that I find on, your Seeks or your job listings require some degree of qualification, and that can be quite an issue, particularly for people that have sort of started without any sort of university education or looking to change across. Because then if you're looking at going to a bachelor's degree, for example, that might take a really long time. So often you need to find a shortcut, and that's what might be where a grad cert comes in, and might be where we sort of come in. But the reality is postgraduate qualifications can help you just clear that first hurdle of getting to the interview. I'll whip through it, and I've got a fairly long form sort of version of this presentation, which I might just send a link to in the course page, so you can go into more detail if you're interested in these earlier points. Solid return on investment if you go through a postgrad study course. You can see all of these are fairly significant. It's not a perfect relationship, because of course there's the intangible things. People that are motivated to go to a master's level are probably more likely to apply for the management jobs, and it might skew this data. But the point is that if you have the qualification, you can expect to earn more throughout the course of your career. So then we start getting into the interesting bit for me, which is why people haven't applied. It's time and money, and it's about making sure that the details are there and the ducks line up. But from my experience, it's actually people's confidence in themselves more than it's people's confidence in us. Not only do we have our reputation, but every tertiary education provider, has been vetted, has to go through the regulation process. If you choose one of them over the other, it might just be for the right reason for you. The question I have is for the people who have always wanted to study but haven't quite got there. That's I think where we can be really useful, because we can sort of flesh out, what sort of feedback you've got from the past, what sort of decision-making process that's led you to, and sort of through that discussion, sort of define an outcome, and then work to build a study plan around where you would like to go based on your past experiences, as opposed to sort of just say, oh, gee, I want to study, but I don't really know why. So I just think they're really important discussions to have. Confidence in us, it's about flexibility and, making sure that people are supported. We can do that, and pretty much anyone can do that. It's about fine-tuning, making sure that we put you in the right program according to your desires. And we can also, really crucially, help you ride that wave of emotion as you make what is really a very serious decision. There's a lot of chat going on, so Hannah or Matt, feel free to interrupt me as I'm going, because I'm not monitoring it, if there's anything that I've missed or anyone really needs to know. So the entrance requirements, just briefly, as I was talking about, a bachelor degree, is part of the pathway. But if you've got a fair bit of industry experience or even professional experience, we can sort of build a course that will set you up for success. That we wouldn't start you with really difficult subjects if you have never touched a computer before, but there might be some really fundamental ones that you can sort of catch up with, build some confidence and skills, and then through a process of getting your foot in the door, or retooling with a bunch of short courses, for example, a bunch of free content added to the piece of paper that gets you into the interview, and then you can just wow them with your wonderful soft skills. Absolutely a sensible pathway. There's no one way to do it. So just get in touch, and we'll help you talk about it. So just to recap, I think regardless of what drives the decision to consider studying, it's just worth it, whether it's its own reward or money or career decisions, or just supporting a family. If you want to study, you're certainly capable of it. Very few people, I think, can't do it. It's just a question of setting students up for success. And there are fewer barriers than you might think. Post-COVID particularly, we're all pretty desperate for students, as I said last week, I think. We just want to make sure that people get what they need and want from their study. So studying with IT Masters briefly, that's where, getting people what they want. That's where we come in. We've got, we think and hope, better courses and a proven online delivery model. Also have loads of information about industry certifications that can help you get better credit outcomes, and a solid reputation in the industry that sort of helps us create better outcomes, not only in terms of graduate outcomes, but credit outcomes, because we know what's going on with industry certifications. We have good relationships with industry bodies. And also, of course, and this I think is key, is, we know that study isn't necessarily the only priority in your life. So we can, tailor your program, let you have the freedom to take the subjects that you want when you want them. And even if things change as part of that process, give you the flexibility to change with them, or change your study with them. I think that's what we're probably best at. So just briefly on the courses and delivery, I think it's much easier for us to recreate a classroom experience online than for you to take 3 hours off work or your other commitments to attend, a lecture on campus, or maybe one lecture on campus a week, particularly at the moment when everything's online anyway. But the difference is we're online not out of necessity, but because we chose to, because we thought it was something that was lacking, 20 years ago. It's becoming, more and more common, but having, I guess, the course built around that is, I think, a fairly important differentiator. So our courses are built, around not only the theory subjects, but the application of the theory subjects. Matt was talking last week about the subject that this short course is tied to, digital forensics, being slightly different to forensic investigations. For us, there's no point giving you the theory without giving you the context around it. It's about making sure that the theory you get makes you job ready, makes you, someone who is attractive for the people that are going to be engaging your services, and whether those services are in one very specific area, or you build a few skills that will make you, worth hiring in the first place, and then you can pad out, as you go through more subjects of a study course. The difference is, we sort of understand what industry needs, and therefore, can tailor the study programs to that. And as the needs change, as a sort of, for example, as Amazon, comes out of, relatively nowhere and becomes an industry heavyweight in cloud computing, and we can add subjects in that space, make sure that students are prepared to actually, kick a few goals in the industry once they're in there. That, I guess, industry knowledge, and really relying on mentors like Matt to sort of teach us about what we need to, incorporate into our programs, really helps students, not only, from making sure that they're doing the right study, but also getting the right recognition of their prior learning. So as you go through your careers, you might get a few industry certifications, and then we can sort of assess them, or have them assessed for you, so that you can cut subjects out that you might have had to take. There's no point making you learn something twice. So we sort of will provide credit for people if they've got industry certifications and if they've got prior experience in an area. I just generally, though, I suspect the greatest benefit of studying with IT Masters is the way we can take our understanding of, whether it's just a course or a subject or the industry at large, and with the right enrollment practices, incorporate our understanding of your goals and objectives to tailor a really sustainable and sensible study plan. I think adult education generally doesn't take advantage of opportunities to communicate the best option within courses, let alone which course for each student. It might sound like a simple thing to do, but it really isn't. We pride ourselves on making sure that, you know, we get that done. We sort of have that discussion up front, and then that guides what we do later. So here's a list of the courses. I assume you would have been looking. Clearly, I think this short course cohort would be interested in the cybersecurity, cloud computing, and networking side of things. You know, the IT master's name gives it away, but project management and digital marketing are pretty relevant too, due to the, I guess, the ubiquity and synergies associated with applying new technology to existing production practices, and that's only going to be, you know, stronger trends down the track. This one down the bottom is actually pretty interesting. The career transition. It's a new course. That one has what do you call it? An internship available for people that haven't been working in the industry and are in a position to sort of you know, invest or take a bit of a hit now in terms of income, ready to study full time for sort of 6 months, and then they can maybe get an internship at the end of it, maybe get a foot in the door at an employer. Something worth looking at if that sounds like it might be you. But again, it's about, you know, what you're up for and what your other commitments are. So yeah, as I said, we work pretty hard to ensure we know what's going on, make sure we're relevant, and make sure that there's no rubbish subjects that are no longer worthy of your time. So yeah, credits available for industry certifications. As they change, so will the credit maps. If you've got any previous academic studies, even if it's sort of in management studies or something sort of tangentially linked, we can sometimes find a bit of a crossover, because you know, we've got the project management subjects and management broadly subjects, and there might be enough of a crossover for us to find a credit for you if you're keen on, I guess, mitigating the time and cost associated with study. Also, these short courses can help. If you do 3 of them, you can get a credit straight away. And we've got a really good program where we can handball you basically to the Australian Computer Society, and they can assess, if you're already embedded in the industry and looking to take the next step, they can sort of assess your experience and just have a good long form chat about what you've done before, and they will rank you on a scale of, you know, IT competence, and we can award credit according to where you sit on that scale. So there's a maximum total credit available here of 50% of any master's or indeed grad cert. So you can do 2 subjects and get credit for 2, and you can check all that out, you know, at the website. Go nuts. Is an old graph, but it highlights what I was talking about. You know, success begets success. You know, we have been, you know, industry leaders in online part-time IT education. People, it sort of becomes self-selecting. We get to build relationships with ACS. We get to, you know, get all of these credit outcomes, and then people continue to come here. So I hope that the industry reputation is sort of a recognition of the quality of our work. One other relationship I should talk about is the ADF, Australian Defence Force. A lot of the people who have been, I guess, selected for the subsidised tertiary education study have been in CSU enrolled students. It's been really rewarding, actually, to sort of build that relationship, build that pathway, and then help people get in. It's been kind of lovely. So, you know, hopefully we can build on that even further. And yeah, this is I guess the nuts and bolts, the, you know, the leaves of absence, flexible study streams, and personalised support are really important. Just to recap, there we go. You can all look at that later. So the study load is sort of 6 to 12 hours per subject per week, and it really depends whether you want to go hell for leather for 1 or 2 sort of study sessions and knock out a grad cert, or do 1 subject at a time. And it really just does depend on your circumstances. Because of the census dates, you can sort of, again, just try before you buy, enroll in a few subjects and drop the ones that you don't like. That's totally fine. And I guess trimester, not semester, pattern of 3 trimesters per year allows you to do, for example, 2 subjects per session. If you're working as well, we sort of think 2 subjects per session is about the most we can expect people to do, without sort of stretching themselves too thin. But that's 6 subjects a year. You do that for 2 years, and you've got your full masters. Or another attractive option is maybe a grad cert with a short course credit. You can do sort of start with 1, ease yourself into your study path, your study programs, and sort of get comfortable in a new setting, and then 2 subjects the next session, and then you can come out with a grad cert and use that to get your foot in the door in the interview process, and then maybe come back and do the masters later and get them to sponsor it. Who knows? There's costs involved, of course. This is the old numbers actually, and I'll sort of come back to this, but yeah, it's a tax deductible, GST exempt in some cases, and we only ever charge you for the subjects that you are studying at the time. So, masters is 12 subjects, but we don't charge you all of those. We just charge you for the subjects as you take them. You can lock in current prices by applying. Who knows what the fees are going to do in the future? But this sort of $33.50 per subject is, I guess, the usual cost, and we'll come back to that later. Regardless of the cost, you can access, in most cases, fee help, a program, to help, a federal program to help students study. It's a government study loan that's interest-free, and it covers all the fees for Australian citizens. And then, repayments only begin if you can afford to pay them. Well, if you're at that threshold. The question of whether you can afford to pay them is a different question. But anyway, there's absolutely access to all of these sorts of programs, and when combined with credit, I think the money associated with study can become a much less significant issue. So the new price paradigm is basically a response to COVID. If you're interested in maybe doing a grad cert, because this is we're talking about grad certs here instead of the masters, you can save loads of money. The subjects that were $33.50 are now down to under 1,000, as you can see there, and you're still eligible for all of the other programs. You're still eligible for all of the credits. So if you have been looking at retooling, now would be an excellent time to do it if all of the other circumstances make it appropriate. So you can essentially walk away with a 4 subjects grad cert for less than $4,000, and then sort of pad it out later with your foot in the door, hoping to sort of take advantage of this new ridiculous job market and online environment that we largely are living in, regardless of whether in Melbourne, for example, you're allowed to have an office at 100% capacity. I don't think that'll be realistic for quite some time. So yeah, I guess I'm sorry if I've sort of gone against your wishes and talked about too much of, I guess, the decisions and the decision-making process behind it, because the details are something that we can all work out. They're on the website. If you have any questions, feel free to chuck them in, because of course we'll be very happy to stay after sort of 9 o'clock, and we'll have to, because I've been rabbiting on for such a long time. We can totally answer those questions if they are, those that are, relevant to your situation. I'm just interested in sort of helping you gain confidence that it's the right decision for you. And there's some ways to do it. Choose your course and contact us for advice. These eligibility assessments on the right here are very good. Basically, you tell us what your story is, and we'll say, this is what's a good, this is what you're eligible for. You can, cut your course study down by, this much, and then maybe talk about the details after all of those decisions have been made, and it becomes so much clearer that it's a really great option. I'm quite happy to talk with people later once we finish the real content, which we should definitely get on to. Sorry for chirping away too much, Matt. Hope you're still with us. Thanks for putting up with me. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll put this on the course page soon.
Okay, thanks, Guy. Excellent. I'm definitely still here, my friend, listening to everything you're saying.
I'm sorry.
All right. No, I'm paying full attention.
All right, got your slides?
I have. You've got me? You got me?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. All right, okay. So welcome back, everyone. So another good, pretty good turnout tonight. Not quite as good as week one, but then you sort of expect that as we go along. So this evening, we're going to talk about data acquisition. And once again, I want to recognize my good friend, Dr. Arif Khan, for basically taking some content of the 597 digital forensic course, which of course we're based on. So let's chuff off into it. So we're going to have a look at an introduction on data acquisition, a little bit of discussion on storage formats and acquisition methods, how we determine the best data acquisition method and the difference between them, acquisition for new platforms, and then the validation process, which is really around the hashing functions and algorithms, which we spoke a little bit about last week. Now, before I proceed too much further, I'll just mention that I have been ill last week, so if my voice gets a bit croaky or you lose sound for a minute, it's probably just me muting so I can cough. So I apologize for that in advance. Okay, so data storage formats for digital evidence. So there's three main storage formats that we talk about in this short course, and which they discuss in ITC 597. So that is raw format, proprietary format, and advanced forensic format. So which one you're going to use is going to be dependent on the package or the tools that you are using. Raw format is basically just taking the raw data or raw evidence off a device and looking at it as is. Proprietary formats are customized or bespoke formats, which are based on the actual tool or package you're going to use. And then the advanced forensics formats are file formats that are specific to things, specific tools like NCASE and FTK and those sorts of forensic tools. And they have a lot more detail and bits and pieces in them, which we'll discuss as we go along here. There are also three types of data acquisition that we look at, being static acquisition, live acquisition, and logical acquisition and or sparse. So logical can be called logical or sparse acquisition. Again, we'll delve into these in a bit more depth as we progress through. In a typical static acquisition, we use a static acquisition when we have access to the device itself. Okay, so if we can take a device, if we can seize a device, seize a physical device from somewhere, we would typically take this away and perform what's called a static acquisition on it. They're always a preferred way to collect digital evidence because it allows you to just take the system away and work on it in a methodical fashion. These are particularly you would use these if you, as I said, you've acquired the system, so you've actually got it. You know the passwords, if there are any. So you've either been given them by someone or you've been able to ascertain what they are, or they don't have any passwords. And if you're only interested in the data on the storage media, such as the hard disk and the flash drives. Okay, so static acquisitions don't give you a clear picture of what's going on as the system is running. So if you're interested in what's running in memory, what's running in the registers, in the browser cache, anywhere that's volatile or semi-volatile, so that is if you take the power off, those sources of evidence will cease to exist. So for example, if you turn the power off on the device, any contents of the memory will be gone. Okay, so static acquisitions are no good for accessing that sort of memory, that sort of evidence. Static acquisitions are about looking at the static storage devices like the hard disk, flash drives, NV RAM in network devices or firewalls, those sorts of things. So areas of evidence that store information that you know is not going to be removed when you turn the power off. If, however, you are interested in what's in the RAM or the registers or the cache on the system, then that's when you need to perform the live acquisition. So in cases when you're dealing with active network intrusions and attacks, or if you suspect employees are accessing areas of your systems or networks that they shouldn't, you would need to do a live acquisition, because you need to catch in that information. The evidence that you're trying to gather is fluid. It's moving all the time. It's not statically in one place. It's going over a network, or it's moving through memory, or it's moving through some sort of buffered or cache system. So you need to be able to do that on the fly. You may also need it when you think that attackers may wipe off the evidence if the system goes offline. So if you try to statically acquire it, it may be gone. If there's information in RAM that's lost, so anything that's volatile, it says RAM there, but really it's anything that's volatile. So think of any of the cache buffers, well, any of the buffers really, regardless of the input and output devices, the random access memory, all that is flushed once the device gets turned off. So static acquisition, not the way to go. Or of course, if you don't know the password of the system, then you need to try and figure out what you can do, because if you turn it off, there may be evidence that's relevant to your investigation that's in volatile areas. If you turn it off without checking first, then you're going to lose that. So although static acquisition is always the preferred method, there are times when you will need to use live acquisition methods, even if they are not the main part of the investigation. They might be a precursor to it. So for example, you turn up at a site, you don't know the passwords to a system, you don't want to turn it off, you've got to do some sort of live acquisition. So either attempt to crack the passwords, get it from somewhere, log in, see what's in the memory, then okay, we've got what we need out of that, shut it down, take it away, then we perform our static acquisition. So in the end, in the vast majority of cases, you will end up doing static acquisition. And as I said, that's a preferred way, but sometimes you need to do a bit of live acquisition as well. So the steps for live acquisition can include creating or downloading a bootable forensic CD or USB drive. And just this afternoon, I put some resources up under this particular week and also for next week as well, of some downloadable bootable forensic software that you can download and put on a USB drive or a CD if you want to, depending on which image you download. So there's a PDF explaining what that is. And we talk about it, I think, a bit later on in one of the slides too as well. But you create some sort of bootable environment. You then make sure you keep a log of all your actions. Again, that's a chain of custody thing. And I know someone mentioned in the Q&A, but in the chat before, that the discussion on chain of custody bores them and turns them off the subject. It is a necessary evil in order to make sure that we can present evidence to a court that is valid and can maintain its integrity. So I get what you're saying. When I talk about my forensic subject 513, RTE 513, we talk a lot about chain of custody, and it does get overwhelming at times, but you do need to keep a log of your actions. You need a network drive or something similar, ideal place to store the information you collect, because it's not necessary to connect it to the device. You can connect via some sort of network connection. You may want to copy the physical RAM if that's what you're interested in, if there's potentially evidence in there. But the next step will vary depending on what sort of incident you're investigating. For example, if it's an intrusion on a particular system, you might want to see whether some sort of malware like a rootkit might exist, or keyloggers or something like that. Some other malware that's been installed on that system, you might want to try and find a trace of that before you go turning things off and going to your static acquisition. From here, you can also access the system's firmware to see whether it's changed. You might want to create an image of the hard drive over a network, although be mindful of bandwidth requirements with that. because remember, it's got to be a bit-by-bit replica. If you're saturating a link, you might find bits and pieces go missing. Therefore, you're undermining the work that you're going to do later on with your static acquisition. Or you might want to, or you may just shut down the system and do static acquisition later. Okay, so it's dependent on what sort of incident you're looking at, what potential evidence may be available. And again, that's going to be driven by what you think may have happened. You have to ensure to get a forensic digital hash value for all the files you recover during a live acquisition. So just that integrity, that validation, which we're going to talk about in a few slides time, just making sure that what you think you have is actually what you do have. You have a copy of the actual, a bit-by-bit copy of the original. A logical or sparse acquisition, well, this can be done during either static or live acquisitions. Okay, so this is really about not taking all the evidence, but taking or not looking at all of a particular device. So say for instance, you've got multi-terabit hard drives or you've got a storage array network. It might take you many hours to trawl through all that, copy all that before you've got an image. So you may find, for example, that you don't need to do that anyway. You can do a logical or sparse acquisition, which is looking at a specific area of the storage system where the evidence is most likely to exist. So say, for example, if you're looking at a shared, a system with multiple user directories on it, and you know 2 or 3 users are involved in doing something wrong, you can look at their particular user directory. So perform a logical or sparse acquisition on their user directories only and not worry about everyone else because no one else is involved. We know these 3 people are involved. Let's look at that area. So it saves you a huge amount of time. Instead of having to take a whole image, we can take a partial image. And this is particularly important if you're investigating some sort of crime that's in a cloud or service provider environment, in which case they might have lots of other customers who have nothing to do with the crime in tail. So you merely look at the areas of the storage system that are related to the suspects, related to what you're investigating. So as I said, use a method when you don't need to examine the entire, says drive there, but the entire storage system that you happen to be looking at. We only capture specific files of interest or specific areas of the storage system that are of interest to our case. The sparse acquisition will also allow you to collect fragments of the unallocated data. So that is information that may have been deleted, or marked for deletion, but is still actually on the storage device. Because for those of you that don't know, in a Windows environment, for example, and many other environments as well, but if you delete a file, it doesn't automatically remove it from the storage system. It marks it for deletion and just says that that storage area is now available to be written over again, but it's not done immediately. So if you are able to get to that area of the storage space before it is overwritten with something else, you can get the original file back. Also useful sparse acquisition for large disks. As I said before, multi-terabit areas, you can use the sparse acquisition. It drastically cut down your time. Another example, if we look at email investigation, which we'll look at in a lot more depth next week, you only really need to look at, say, PST or OST files in a Microsoft Outlook context. How do we determine the best acquisition method? Or what are the best acquisition methods? First, for any type of acquisition, we can collect using one of 4 methods. Okay, we can create a disk to image file, which is the preferred way to do it in most cases. So we take the storage device and we turn it into an image, which we can then do our investigation on. So we can either restore that image onto another similar device, or we can manipulate that image using our forensic package. We can create a disk-to-disk copy. Now that's okay, that's fine to do that. We have to bear in mind, however, that the geometry of the 2 disks, so that is the sectors and platters and the actual logical geometry of the disks are the same, because if they're not, there is a potential to lose evidence in transition. We can create a logical disk-to-disk or disk-to-data file, which is similar to the physical image, but we're doing it at a logical, so a partition level. or we can create a sparse data copy of a file or folder. So as we said before, we don't want to look at the entire storage area, we just look at a small part of it. And which one of these we use will depend on the circumstances of the investigation. But in most cases, if we can, disk to image is the best way to go, because then we can replicate that image to other devices. Later on down the track, we can keep making further copies from the image that we've made to enable us to continue to investigate should things go wrong or should we mess up one of the images. More difficult. These other three are a little more complex. There's some more caveats around. As I said, disk to disk, we need to make sure the geometry is the same. There are other issues that we need to be mindful of. Disk to image is the cleanest and best way if we can achieve that. To create a disk to image file, most common, offers the most flexibility, as I said. We should make more than one copy, and the more the better, because we can all make mistakes where things go wrong, images fail, devices fail. The more copies we have, the better off we are placed to not to have to go back to the original, because the more times we go back to the original, the greater the chances are that we may mess something up. Disk to image copies are bit for bit replications of the original drive. So they are an exact copy. And tools like these ones here, some of these ones here, so FTK we look at is one of the tools we talk about. There's a couple others that will pop up as times go on. But these all allow you to do disk to image creation. Creating a disk to disk, when a disk to image copy is not possible for whatever reason, tools can adjust the disk's geometric configuration, but just be mindful that that is an issue that you have to take care of. Things like encase, safeback, and snap copy will allow you to do that, but just be mindful that it has to be done. Otherwise, the potential is there that you can lose information. When you make a copy, consider the size of the source disk. So lossless compression might be useful. So you might need to compress because the storage space you have might not be as big as the actual source disk. And use your digital signatures to verify that the information you think you've got actually is right. So you've got a bit by bit copy. If we're working with large drives, and as an alternative to using lossless compression, you can determine whether you can actually retain the disk. So are you able to take the disk? You may not be able to too. As I said before, if you're working in that sort of service provider environment, you may not actually be able to take the disk because there might be other customers that are using it. So you can only take part of it. So then you've got your sparse acquisition, or it might be a single drive within a multi-user system and you can't take it down. So you might be able to take a disk to disk or disk to image, but you can't retain the disk itself. And then you have to be mindful of making sure that you have enough storage space, appropriate storage space. You need to consider the time to perform the acquisition. So if it's a really big drive, it can take a lot of time to do it, particularly if it's within a system that is heavily utilized. And you also need to consider where the evidence is potentially located on that disk. So again, it might open up that opportunity for a sparse or logical acquisition. Data acquisition from the clouds is obviously something that's new or emerging. And the first thing you need to do is actually locate where the actual relevant clouds data centers actually are. So where is the physical information actually stored? Because there are a number of legal and technical challenges related to retrieving evidence from cloud service providers. And most of those relate to cross-jurisdiction. From what I'm led to believe, I'm not an expert on the legal side of it, but from what I understand, it's that cross-jurisdiction in particular that can be rather problematic. Also applies to online social networks. You don't know where that information is actually stored, so you need to be able to ascertain where that is. Yes, you could potentially do a live acquisition over the network, but there's no guarantee that you'll be able to do that. There's no guarantee that it will work. And then things like data acquisition from smartphones, okay, may include inquiry messages, phone contacts, images or videos, which could be stored in smartphones, could be web browser history, they could be on online social networks, they could be in a cloud somewhere. Okay, so there's multiple complexities when we're talking about these new and emerging platforms. Some contingency plans that we can talk about for image acquisitions. Obviously, the first one is create a duplicate copy of your evidence image file. So 2 images of different evidence, of digital evidence, so 2 images of your original at least, and try to use different tools or techniques, but always use your verification using your hashing later on after you've made the image, so that you know that the image is a bit by bit copy. If you use multiple tools to create the image, it then gives you flexibility. Excuse me while I take a drink. You can copy a host protected area of a drive as well. You need to consider using a hardware acquisition tool that can actually access the disk drive at the BIOS level, so the basic input output level. So at the lowest hardware level you can possibly get to. Otherwise, you're not generally going to see the HBA area of a disk drive with a typical tool. And be prepared to deal with encrypted drives. Okay, so things like whole disk encryption, so BitLocker in Windows can make static acquisitions more difficult because you need to have a decryption key in order to be able to see it in the first place. And there's an article on that, there's a resource on that on Moodle for you to have a look through and to dig down into that in a little bit more detail. Caching the data. So this is about ensuring the integrity of the data that you collect. And this is the most important thing in order to be able to present the evidence in court. If you haven't got a perfect replica of the original, then you're going to open yourself up for all sorts of holes to be poked in your case. Now, most forensic tools will offer hashing of image files, particularly the ones that use, the platform-based systems. So things like Ncase, FTK, or Topsy also has a hashing feature as well. So most of the good quality tools, whether they're open source or commercial, certainly commercial ones will provide you that ability to hash the image, so pass the image through a hashing algorithm, as we spoke about last week, spit out the fixed value, compare it to the original. Is it the same? Good, we know that we've got an exact copy. We can use advanced hex editors to ensure our data integrity. And we look at WinHex in a little bit and talk about that, particularly next week when we look at some of the different areas that we can look at, investigate, some of the evidence forms we can look at. Raw format images don't contain metadata, so they're just a raw copy, so they don't require the metadata. So there may be some issues around that you want to contemplate. Separate manual validation is recommended for all raw acquisitions. So that is, we have to go through that process of that validation manually. So do it separately, notwithstanding what happens within the actual tool that you get the image from. So to be sure. As we sort of alluded to on the last slide, the validation of the evidence may in fact be the most critical aspect of our forensic journey. And we need to use a hashing algorithm or function or application that allows us to do that. So excuse me for a second.
Well, while you're drinking, Matt, Adnan's asked a question about hashing. If you elect for the sparse data acquisition approach, do you hash or verify the integrity of particular dimensions, like the sector or folder, or do you still hash the entire disk or whatever bit you can get at?
No, well, you could run your hashes over the individual construct, if you like, that you're actually obtaining. So if you're just great, because you might grab a directory, you might grab some files, you might grab a portion of a disk, whatever it is. So if you're grabbing individual files, run a hash over each of the individual files. So whatever you're targeting, run the hashing over that particular construct.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
All right. So, and as we said last week, a hashing algorithm is a mathematical function that gives you a fixed length output. So these are some of the hashing functions that are available. So MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256, SHA-512. The difference in these is really the bit length, particularly the SHAs. Between the SHAs is a bit length. And you can see that these hash keys are substantially longer than this one here, for example. So in this case, we've run this calculator over this particular file over itself, which is interesting. It spat out these values, and then we can select which one we're going to use. And then once we copy that file, we would then run the hash calculator over that file again and make sure that it spat out the same value. And if it did, in this case, the green value, we know that it's okay. So it's a legitimate copy. Now, if we have a RAID system, so a redundant array of independent disks, so that's basically a conglomeration of physical disks configured in some way, because there's many different ways you can configure a RAID system, but configured in such a way as to provide a larger amount of storage space. So combining the capacity of multiple physical disks into one logical array. Now, it can be challenging and frustrating because of the different complexities in the way that RAID systems are designed, configured, and they're sized. Okay, so size is the biggest concern we're worried about, because a lot of systems can be multi terabits in size. Okay, so they might have and I'm sure some of you will have seen them before, and I've certainly seen them, where you've basically got whole racks just filled with servers, if you like, filled with hard drives that are configured as RAID arrays. So they literally can be massively huge in terms of their logical capacity. And that's the biggest issue with trying to sift through it. Either taking a disk to image copy in these sort of circumstances is largely impossible, but even drilling down to, even doing sparse acquisition, even drilling down to that level can be really, really difficult as well. But size is certainly the main concern. The way they're configured can be an issue in terms of getting access to the information or getting access to the logical partitions or the parts of the drive that you need, particularly if you're concerned about the geometry of the system. Remote network acquisition tools. You can, of course, remotely connect to a suspect computer via network connection and perhaps copy information from it. Difficult, problematic to do disk to image transfers, although it's not impossible, of course, because there are a number of packages out there that allow you to do that. But because you're not physically at the device, you're never 100% sure of what you really, what's actually there, and whether what you're seeing is 100% representative of what's actually on the device or what's happening at the console itself. And the remote acquisition tools will vary substantially in their configurations and their capabilities over a network. And of course, you then have to have a suitable underlying network architecture and appropriate network bandwidth or network resources for you to be able to copy the files that you need. If there's a lot of really large files you need to copy, then that's going to take some significant time to do over a network, regardless of how fast it may or may not be. Some other drawbacks include things like antivirus or anti-spyware or firewall. I'll get it out in a minute. Bit tongue-tied there. Firewall tools, or in fact things like intrusion detection and prevention systems that might be configured on those remote systems. They can be problematic as well. It is possible that suspects will install their own security backdoors and tools and triggers that will then notify them if you are trying to access remotely, and then allow them to cut you off, disconnect physically, or simply shut down.
Is it fairly common that you're doing it without the suspect's knowledge? Like this is before it gets to the point where it's been, I don't know, like it seems if people have identified that there's a problem and they've called in someone to do some forensics work, that, you'd excise the problem, wouldn't you? Like,
It would be less, look, in my experience, it would be less likely. You think about the industrial espionage and the spy stuff. that goes on. Undoubtedly, that's, most of that's remote, obviously,
Mm.
but they're significantly more sophisticated than what we're sort of trying to aim at in this particular course.
Mm.
But in general, yeah, look, in my experience with these sort of investigations, it's less likely that you would do remote, although there have been times, particularly in corporate investigations, where you might be suspicious of someone on a particular workstation. You want to capture them in the action, and so you would connect via an RDP console or a remote or other out of band remote console to see what was going on. That's certainly done that before.
Mm. Cool.
But in the main, you're right. Yeah, you would use this less frequently than you would the other methods, for sure.
Cheers.
Excuse me. So validating with hex editors. So this is WinHex. So a tool that is available freely in certain versions. And it's an advanced hex editor. It's not available in all digital tools, but so it can be a good additional tool that you would use. It is available in some packages, but in general, often, I guess thinking about it, I guess a lot of forensic investigators that I would that I would know, or in the times where I've done these sorts of investigations, you're more likely to have these as a separate tool rather than as a. So if you use something like Encase and you've got all the bells and whistles, it's very expensive and generally very niche. The sort of markets that would use that. So WinHex is, or tools like this, are a very valuable addition to your toolkit. So they allow you to look deeply into almost as deeply as you can get into files or storage areas or RAM or whatever it is that you've got open in it. They allow you to hash as well, so they allow you to provide that that verification of what you're looking at. And really, you can't get much closer to the horse's mouth than looking at it in hex. You'll see in this particular, let me just turn this on for a sec. There you go, got it now. You'll see in this area here, this is an ASCII representation of what we're seeing in the hex. Okay, and this offset is basically the address on whatever device we're looking at here. So we're looking at a document file in a particular directory by the look of it. So this is basically the address of it. This is the hex digits, hex representation of what's actually on the disk or in the file, and then this is the ASCII representation here, which some of it will be readable, some of it won't be, depending on what sort of. So if you were to open up a notepad file, for example, that was written in text, you would see the contents of it here. In this case, because it's a Word document, some of it will be gobbledygook because of the fact that it requires an application to actually a more complex application, got more complex codes embedded within it. So this can sometimes provide you with some really good information. Other times it's just gibberish that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But until you open it, you don't know. Also, a really cool tool for if you're investigating or trying to find if there's any evidence hidden in images, a thing called steganography, which now we don't look at it in this course, in this short course, but it is part of 597. Acquisition tools for Windows. So the advantages are that they make acquiring evidence from a suspect drive more convenient because it's in that nice GUI environment, especially if we're using hot swappable devices, because we can do that. Although it's not the single domain of Windows, obviously, to do that. Disadvantages, we have to protect our acquired data with a well-tested write blocking hardware device. So we basically have a thing called a write blocker, and we connect that in line between our device and our investigative workstation, and it stops our workstation from making any writes to that device, because we don't want to write to that device. We want to take an image of it. We don't want to write anything to it, because then we're introducing changes, invalidating our evidence. Most Windows tools can't acquire data from the disk host protected area. As I was saying before, you need to access more at the BIOS level to do that. And some countries haven't accepted the use of write blocking devices for data acquisition. So in other words, in some places they're just not used or are not accepted. There's a package called Mini-WinFE, Forensic Examiner, which this is what the tool that I put the links up for on Moodle this afternoon. And it allows you to configure a boot CD or a boot USB key. And it provides you with a Windows-based forensic environment that you can run on a device, and it mounts the connected drives as read-only, so you can't write back to them. So it's basically like a preliminary or preparatory environment in Windows. Before you boot the suspect's computer, you simply connect your target drive through USB or whatever other connections you want to use. And then after you've booted into the Mini-Win Forensic Examiner environment, you can see all the drives that are there. You can alter your target USB drive to read-write mode. Okay, so that then you can write from, so you can read from the device in the storage device or drive in the device out to your target device that you're going to acquire your evidence on using whatever acquisition program you want to use. Now, WinFE comes with some pre-installed, so it's basically, it's almost a perfect forensic tool, forensic environment. And again, there's a PDF document up on Moodle for you to read, which basically goes through what I'm just talking about, how to install it, how to run it, and the tools available on it. So it's got things like it's got FTK installed on it, or FTK Imager installed on it, so you can make your images with that. The great power with this, obviously, is that it puts everything in read-only mode. You then change your target drive to read-write, and you can copy things over without worrying that you're going to destroy anything on the source drives. You can also use things like FTK Imager Lite, which again, I think is that's a practical activity for this week. So it's basically, it's a cut down version of, or a subset of FTK, so the full forensic toolkit, and it's designed for viewing evidence disks and specifically making disk to image files. Yep. Okay. So yep, make disk image copies. Yep, that's great. Evidence. In this case, you need some sort of write blocking device to prevent writing back to the source drive in the first place. But it's a great little tool, and you'll see when you go through the practical activity, it works well. I've used it many times myself. It's a good tool that works well, provides you with a hash at the end of it. You know exactly what you got. As I said, the only disadvantage with it is you need a write blocking device, or alternatively, you run it from a live CD such as WinFE, Mini-WinFE, okay, because it's installed on that. Mini-WinFE in the background turns everything to read only. Okay, there's your write blocking there. Digital forensic cases, how do we approach them? Basic steps apply to majority of cases, not all, but the majority. For target drives, we want to use recently wiped media that have been reformatted and inspected for viruses. So we want clean target drives. If they're not clean, so if they haven't been zeroed out and cleared out, if they've still got stuff on them, that's going to impact what we're copying across potentially. So they have to be sterile, what we call sterile white media. We inventory the hardware on the suspect's computer and note the condition of the seized computer. So again, this is a chain of custody thing, rules of best evidence thing. So we're making sure that we have a complete inventory and understanding of what's on the source device. When we do our static acquisitions, we remove the original drive and we check the date and time values in the system CMOS. So that is basically, we check the system time and date on the source system. And we make sure we take a note of that so we can match it up with what we see moving forward. We record how we acquire the data from the suspect drive. So what tools are we using? What process are we using? Again, rules of best evidence, chain of custody, but in addition to that, if you make a mistake somewhere down the track and you've documented your process word for word up until that point, then you can go, okay, I made a mistake here. So you go back to a secondary image that you made and you complete all the steps up to that point, and then you try something different and hope that it doesn't come up with a mistake. Okay, if you've only got one image, you're blown out of the water. If you don't make if you don't keep a record of all the steps you've done, you might be blown out of the water because you might forget what you've done up until then and redo the same mistake over and over again. And then we need to process the drive's contents methodically, logically, with a method. Okay, whatever method that is will be dependent on the tools you use, on your level of expertise, on the type of crime you're investigating, on the type of evidence that you're looking for. Okay, too many variables in that to talk about in a short course. So that's something that we talk about more in the subject. But when you need to have a method, logical, and follow a process, stick to it, document everything. List all the folders and files on the image or drive. Okay, so get a directory listing, more or less. Examine the contents of all those data files in all the folders. Remove the file contents for all password protected files. Identify the function of every executable file that doesn't match hash values. Okay, so compare them to hash values. What's going on there? What's changed? And then, of course, maintain control of all the evidence and findings for that. Here it comes again, chain of custody, rules of best evidence. All right. So that's it for a brief overview, really, of data acquisition. We could have gone into a heck of a lot more detail, but we'll save that for a longer subject, a longer course. So let's, what questions have we got, Guy, that we haven't already answered?
About a dozen so far. So yeah, quite happy to hang around for a little while longer, folks. If you have any questions, chuck them in. One I want to ask is you sort of saying in most cases follow these sort of 10 or so steps, and the slide itself says, always follow this. What sort of instances would you not follow this? Can you think of any circumstances? Bit of a question without notice.
Yeah, well, if you're doing if you're doing a live acquisition, for example, or if you're doing an acquisition remotely, you may not be able to perform all of those steps, or you may not be able to perform those steps in that particular order. Now, that sort of, whoops, hang on, I'm in the wrong spot. Let me go back to here. So this says for all digital forensic investigations. Okay, so within the subject, we're saying this is a process we're going to follow, but realistically, there are too many variables to potentially consider to say this is the one and only process we're going to follow in all cases. As I said, if you're doing something, trying to acquire evidence over a network connection, you might not be able to do all of these steps. You might still you might still have a sterile, you still need some sort of sterile environment to copy it onto, agreed. You may not be able to get an inventory of the hardware on the suspect's computer if you're going remotely. Yes, there are tools that will allow you to do that remotely, but have you got time to use them? Are they appropriate to use? Are they going to trigger any alerts off that's going to jeopardize the evidence that you're trying to look at? Static acquisition, yep, okay. So if you're not doing a static acquisition, then that step obviously doesn't apply. So that's what I mean is you're not always going to use that specific process. There might be times when you might use, out of those 10 steps, you might use 6 of those steps, but the other steps are not going to be appropriate. But it's a guideline. It's a reference that you can go back to, and if you can, follow the bouncing ball. But if you can't, you have to improvise, adapt, and overcome based on your individual circumstances.
Beauty, thank you. Victor's asked a few questions, or a couple of questions, I should say. One is a link that isn't working, so thanks for that. I'll just reply to that with text, and we'll look into it, folks. But thanks for letting us know. If everyone wants to look in the answered section, they can see which one they can expect isn't working. And then another one is talking about metadata laws. And it's just a little bit ambiguous. So Victor, if you could maybe have another crack at typing it out, and we'll have a look at it.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm not an expert on the metadata laws, to be frank, but what I'm looking at that question now. Could the person be denied access to it? Not RAID, but BitLocker. Yeah, and I'll probably need, if it's a simple question of, I mean, yes, you could be denied access to it if it's encrypted, obviously, and you can, you don't always have to go along with the law. So, I mean, there are circumstances where, not legally, but circumstances where those laws could break down. Absolutely. If that's the question Victor's asking, but I'm not 100% sure. So,
yeah, let us know,
if we can
Victor,
get him to, yeah.
Still around. Thank you anyway. Akasha's asked, do we have to submit our hashes or present them in a court of law, or is it just for reference if it's requested?
Well, it will depend, but it is part of the rules of best evidence and chain of custody. So you would definitely keep a reference to it, and then if required, if anything was challenged, then you would need to present it to say, well, no, this evidence is 100% right because these hashes match. So we know we've got a direct copy of the original.
Beauty, thank you. Steve's question here, if size is an issue, for example, getting an image of large systems, how is it done? Are there any sort of cool tools that people can use to turbocharge these sort of things? Do we get a truck to drive to the premises and, chuck it in like the Amazon trucks or anything like that?
Yeah, it gets complicated when you're talking about like really big systems like that. Gets really complicated from a legal perspective. There are certainly forensic stations or forensic servers that you can get that will allow you to copy large amounts of data. But if you're talking about something that's got hundreds or thousands of terabytes of data, that I can't feasibly foresee a situation where the standard law enforcement or standard forensic investigator would be in a position where they would need to look at that much data or to copy that much data, because that's where the sparse and logical acquisition comes in. So you only look at what you need to, and that's obviously relevant for those cloud service provider environments. If you're talking about secret agencies like NSA and ONI and those sorts of places, then the capability exists there via other means. What those means are 100%, I don't know. That's certainly outside the scope of my knowledge, but there are forensic stations and servers and devices. So disk duplication devices, which basically go disk to image on a CD format, or disk to disk using RAID themselves. So there are systems that you can purchase, but again, they all have their the scalability limits. I mean, you can't literally. I've never heard of anyone turning up with a semi-trailer full of disks and powering them up to do an acquisition. I think that would be outside the realm of the typical forensic investigator. Not so it's not impossible on some scale, but certainly outside the realms of what a typical forensic investigator would do.
Thank you. Jason's asked about methods and rules around recovering / acquiring data from password protected files. Are there sort of any rules of thumb, or quite apart from the ethical stuff that we were talking about last week, good tools that we can use, or or yeah, just standard practices?
No, look, no, I wouldn't say there's any typical tools that I would recommend to use. The basic, I mean, the best thing you can do, if you can, is get the password off the user by hook or by crook type thing. If the user is not around, then you can try some sort of brute forcing, but then that also has to be, you also have to take into account what else that may do to the system, or what else that may do to the evidence, if it may potentially change things. The other thing that is quite common is you say, all right, well, we can't actually get into the password protected files, but we're going to take a copy of them anyway. And we look at all the other aspects of the file. So the properties of the file, you know, the metadata we've built into the file, whatever that may be. So like for example, with a Word document, for example, if you look at the properties and the metadata around that, you can find out quite a lot about it without having to actually open the file, although obviously that's the end objective. So, and some passwords can be quite easy to break, to crack, and I'm not sure whether it would be appropriate to say which ones those are. They are freely available to find that information via Google, so I probably shouldn't offer that just from an ethical viewpoint. But there are a number of different file formats that allow you to password protect them, but it's only rudimentary. It's very easy to bypass. For those that encryption is probably more of the issue, more of the worry rather than passwords, and in that case, you know, the ultimate is to just try and get the encryption keys off the target rather than try to break it. And again, how much effort you're going to put into doing that is going to be determined by how much value you're going to place in the particular evidence that's protected by that encryption or password, and whether or not there is avenue to other evidence that may, you know, build the narrative of what's going on rather than using that particular file. If that makes sense. Excuse me.
No worries. Thank you. Cheers. Bless you. Paul has answered Victor's question about the link that isn't working, and saying the link does work, Victor, but you have to fill in the data on the side panel first, and they email a link to you. So that's for the sort of you know, hands-on task that Matt posted to the course page earlier. Thanks, Paul. Alrighty, let's go for another question. Victor's refined the question. So the government wants to view data searches on the computer. Suppose the owner of the computer denied access to the government to view, and even with a warrant, the computer was seized for forensics investigation and found a BitLocker to prevent from reading it. Could the government still ask for access after being denied? Are there tools to crack the BitLocker?
Yes, well, I can think of a couple of interesting contexts around that. Now, first of all, yes, of course, the government can still ask. Whether they get it or not is another thing, but they can still ask. There are tools that will help you to crack BitLocker encryption. In fact, all encryption. Again, I'm probably not ethically obliged not to divulge too much information about that, but certainly, yeah. I mean, no encryption is uncrackable. It just depends on how much effort you want to take into doing it. The other thing you've got to consider is places like Apple, for example, and Microsoft and some other companies have stated that you know, that the protection of the user's information is paramount. And so there've been, I'm sure we would have seen them, everyone would have seen them. There's been cases in America where, so for example, law enforcement have been trying to bust into someone's iPhone to find some evidence, and they haven't been able to do it. They haven't been able to break in and crack in. No tool, they haven't found any tool, haven't got any tool that will access, bypass the security on the iPhone. And they've actually contacted Apple for help, and Apple have refused on the basis that, you know, the sanctity of the user's information is sacrosanct, so they won't do anything to do it. So there are plenty of cases where that's happened. So even the FBI have been refused. Apple said, no, we're not going to help you. And unless they can get the unlock code, for example, off the owner of the phone, then there's not a lot they can do about it. So in answer to your question, yes, the laws might be there and they can still ask for it, but there are, particularly in the States, there are laws that will protect the users against that. If Apple chooses not to assist with it, then there's not a lot that they can do about it. In certain circumstances, I mean, I'm guessing if it's a crime to do with homeland security or something like that, then it's a different kettle of fish. But for just standard everyday sort of criminal activity, it can be knocked back, absolutely.
Speaking of homeland security and that sort of thing, all of these backdoor loops that I keep hearing about that, the NSA, for example, have got, is that sort of above and beyond what we'd be talking about in the course? And
Yep.
are they real? is that
well, your guess is as good as mine, really. I mean, there's lots of
yes, they are.
there's lots of talk and innuendo about it. I would be, and look, have I seen evidence of them? Directly evidence? I'm a bit like, I'm very, I follow the scientific method in that I need to see something before I 100% believe it. But that's probably one circumstance in which I'm probably willing to make an exception. I would be surprised, I would be utterly amazed if they didn't exist.
Mm.
Absolutely flabbergasted if they didn't exist at some level. What the scope is and how far they reach into the ordinary person's lives, I don't know, and I probably don't really want to think about it. But in terms of high level stuff, backdoors into, if you're talking about espionage, I mean, I don't think there's any. You'd have to be naive to think that they didn't exist, I think.
Certainly. Terai has asked, what is a write blocking device? Is it physical? Is it software?
Can be both, can be one or t'other. So in the example of the Win forensic examiner environment that I was talking about, that's actually a software write blocker, but you can actually get physical hardware devices as well. So they literally plug in. So if you've got, say, a source drive, which is a USB drive, you would plug it into one side of the write blocker and you would plug your target drive into the other side. And that device would stop you from copying anything back over to that source drive. So they can be both hardware and software.
Beauty, thank you. Hannah and everyone, please stop sending in questions. And Hannah, could you please, any further questions, dismiss them. We'll probably keep going to about 9:30, and thanks very much everyone for hanging around for the questions. Akash has asked, what if we're investigating cloud infrastructure? Is the procedure the same, or are there any differences for cloud-specific investigations?
Well, that's what I was saying before. We actually talk about cloud stuff next week in more detail, so we'll sort of elaborate on that a little bit next week. But that's what I was saying in answer to your question, guys, that process is a general guideline, but there will be times when you'll do something a little bit different. So, and cloud environment again is possibly where you may not use all of those steps, or they might be in a slightly different order, because in terms of the cloud, one of the steps was about, or one of the discussion points was about finding out where the actual physical data resides. Because if you're, say, here in Australia and you're trying to investigate on a cloud service platform and the physical data is in the States, it's not practical for you to get there and physically copy the information. So then you're going to have to do that acquisition over a network connection or via some other means and methods. And then you've got to also consider the legal jurisdiction and all that sort of guff as well. But aside from that, your process will be slightly different then. Whereas in another example, you may actually, there may be a service provider that's just got a cloud-based storage system that they're providing to their customers. You know where it's physically located, and you'll actually go and you'll run through that exact process. because you can physically connect to it. So there's no, I wouldn't say there's a rule of thumb with cloud service provider as well. It's really going to depend on the individual circumstances of the case you're looking at.
Beauty, thank you. And apologies for the double up question. Neil's asked how best to get more hands-on forensic investigations with the processes. Learning via video or even face-to-face is all great, but actual practice is critical. Where to learn? Well, studying. These are where the hands-on tools that you've given us are really great. Now, I also think that it would be a great idea to, if you've all been playing with this sort of stuff in your own time or as part of your, augmenting of this short course content, let us know in the forum. If you found something that's great, if you found something that's rubbish, chuck it in the forum, and we can all sort of work together to build a good resource library. Anything that comes off the top of your head, Matt?
Yeah, well, I'll just say that there's there is literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of forensic tools that you can, or tools that you can use for forensic purposes. And I think that's really important to delineate that we're not just, as forensic investigators, we're not just using specific forensic tools, we're using tools for forensic purposes. So we can use any tool we like, any command line tool, any Windows tool we like, if it can give us some information or some evidence, then so things like ping or traceroute, for example, or telnet are valid tools to use in a forensic investigation. So they don't have to be specific forensic tools. But more general, the answer to that, I think, is my recommendation would be to, there's a bucket, and some of the sites are on, some of the links are already on the Moodle site for you to look at, but there are lots of websites out there that will provide you with forensic tool images, so things that you can boot your own device off and play around with. VR using some sort of virtual environment is also good, so VM Workstation or VirtualBox are really good tools that you can download. Again, there's places like SANS, and there's a number of others. I think Norton also provide them somewhere, or Symantec, whoever they are now, or have been for many years. Norton's an old one, but anyway, they will allow you to download images, so virtual images that you can then muck around with tools on to get that hands-on practice. The thing I would say is be really careful with what you download and the environment you use it in, because sometimes it can get a bit out of control, and you can end up actually damaging things. So my advice would be to put it on a separate device from what you normally use, so a non-production, or not your personal laptop that's got all your personal stuff on it, or in a virtualized sandbox environment, and just get whatever tools you want. Download Kali Linux, download OS Forensics, download WinFE, and just play with it. Absolutely, getting that hands-on practice is absolutely the best thing you could do. The only other thing I'd say is make sure that you follow some sort of process rather than just attack it from all angles at the same time. I think if you follow some sort of process, you'll get better value out of it.
Thanks. And I imagine across different operating systems as well. David's asking about any.
Yeah, if you can, absolutely.
Any sort of professional preferences, either you or just the industry in general, but more specifically is asking how is Linux viewed in a professional forensic context?
I don't know that there's any. I get there's a lot of Windows, a lot of the forensic packages like NCase are built for a Windows environment. So you probably say that maybe that's the maybe that's the commercial side of it. Saying, well, we prefer sort of Windows environment. But and that's maybe if you're talking about a law enforcement sort of context, where generally you'll have, let's face it, to become a digital forensic investigator for a law enforcement agency, normally you'd be a law enforcement official for a number of years, and then you transfer into that. And you may not have a lot of IT skills, and so the Windows-based tools facilitate quicker learning and easier development, and it's all point and click and so on and so forth, as we know. But for a lot of hardcore old school forensic investigators, Linux is still the the tool of choice. And they will use a number of individual tools instead of a packaged commercial software. They'll use different tools that suit their experiences and their feel. And I guess it's a bit like vulnerability scanning and penetration testing, in that you can download a whole heap of automated tools that will do a job for you, but true human ingenuity shows its true colors when you're actually using individual tools and you're getting your hands really, really dirty. And forensic investigation is no different. If you're using lots of command line tools and you're taking a real focused methodological approach to the investigation, it'll allow you to dig a lot deeper and become more sophisticated in terms of your own skill development than it would be if you went off and used FTK or NCASE or some other commercial package.
Thanks, Matt. I don't think there can be any better advice tonight. So I reckon we might end it there. It's 9:30 Eastern time. I want to thank everyone for hanging around. Remember that next week we're going to be broadcasting on a Tuesday because of Easter in Australia. Hannah has also asked me to mention that there has been an issue with passwords for the course page. We know that there's an issue and some of you might not have been able to get on. We're working on that and making sure that there's a nice easy fix, and that hopefully that'll all be resolved fairly soon. Other than that, thanks heaps for your presentation, Matt, and thanks, Hannah, for hanging around and moderating the chat. Next week we'll be getting into some real nitty-gritty stuff, Matt, I believe.
Yeah, we will be. So we'll be looking at different types of investigations. We'll be looking at file systems. So each of the, well, not all the file systems, but the more common ones. So more of the Windows-based file systems, email, social networks, and something else which eludes me for the moment. But yeah, looking at those different types of cloud service provider. So looking at those in a little bit more depth and looking at some of the complexities and some of the tools that we might use in those different situations.
Looking forward to it. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks, Hannah. Thank you, Matt, as always. Ever a pleasure.
And thank you, Guy.
All righty. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.